The Georgia Bulldogs are no stranger to the postseason, but there is a lot of turnover off of last year's team. And we've already gotten a little bit of a glimpse of what this offense might look like with Gunnar Stockton as the starting quarterback, and he goes into the spring as the odds-on favorite to win that job yet again. Now, how will the offense change? Well, if you look at Gunnar Stockton, compared to what they had the last 2 years with Carson Beck, you have a little bit more mobility at the quarterback spot. You have a guy that's maybe not as talented throwing the ball down the field, but has plenty of arm talent in his own right. And if you look at his game, and he models his game after Connor Shaw from a few years back at South Carolina. Remember how good Connor Shaw was? It's just a baller. Probably 10, 12 years ago. Connor Shaw was one of the best players in the SEC, but his God-given ability was not outrageous, but man, he was just a grinder. He just continued to find ways to win games. He was athletic, he was accurate, he was decisive. So I look at Gunnar Stockton, and he's got a lot of Connor Shaw vibes, and ironically, he wears 14 because that was the number that Connor Shaw wore at South Carolina. So he's following in really good footsteps. But when I look at him and try to compare him to Georgia quarterbacks from years past, he reminds me a little bit of Jake Fromm, but with a little bit more mobility, and he's a little tougher as a runner. He wants to lower the shoulder. He wants to get the hard yards. I think that's going to be a part of what they do in short yardage situations, is utilize quarterback run this upcoming season. One big question mark for Georgia, because it was such a problem last year, has been the wide receivers. I mean, how many different times did we watch the receivers last year drop balls that could have led to big plays? I mean, in the playoffs, you have big posts that could have been a touchdown, it's dropped. Big plays over the middle, dropped. This was the most inconsistent group on Georgia's team last year, and that's saying something, because that offensive line, partly because of injury, was outrageously inconsistent as well. They did go out and they tried to address it by way of the portal. They go bring in Zachariah Branch from USC, who I think will fill the void of kind of a catch and run guy. Just get them the ball. They love those screens at the line of scrimmage. Well, Zachariah Branch excels in those areas. They also have a little bit bigger, more prototypical outside wide receiver in Noah Thomas, who transfers over from Texas A&M. Has been a little bit inconsistent, but his length is always a problem at 6'6", and he could be a matchup nightmare for an undersized corner. And they bring back some other guys that played some ball last year, like Dylan Bell, who's a super versatile piece, Nitro Tuggle, and Sokovie White. The tight end spot is a spot that needs to get a little bit more pronounced. This was a group last year that didn't do a great job of contributing in the passing game. Now, there were some times, like against Tennessee last year, where Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky, those guys did a great job. But for the most part, the production at the tight end spot pales in comparison to the production that we saw 2 years prior with Brock Bowers for a number of years. So I'm not saying they're going to replicate Brock Bowers' production, but if they can get a little bit more out of the tight end spot, I think that would go a long way towards helping their passing attack, because I think the running back room is going to be really interesting. You look at the starter, it's probably going to be Nate Frazier. He was really good at times last year. Now, there were times when he put the ball on the floor, did have some fumbles, which always makes you a little bit uncomfortable. But as far as his ability to put fear in the defense with his explosiveness, that's always going to be there, but he's not going to have to do it alone. They've been banged up with injuries at times at the running back spot the last few years, but Branson Robinson, Roderick Robinson, Nate Frazier. You might even have, a couple other guys, because it always feels like Georgia's got somebody that no one's talking about that ends up being a big difference maker at that position as well. They're going to be perfectly fine at running back. And then on defense, they should be in pretty good shape. Yes, they lose some difference makers like Mykel Williams, like Jalen Walker. Yes, there's some take over the game guys that need to be replaced, but there's enough guys, and Georgia does a pretty good job of rolling young players so that they'll get them in the lineup. They might play in a role, but they'll get them into the lineup as true freshmen so that when they're sophomores and juniors, they're quite a bit further ahead as far as conceptual understanding and the bigger picture with how they want to defend the opposing offense. So I look at Christian Miller, KJ Bolden, CJ Allen, Chris Cole, Dalen Everett, Raylan Wilson. I mean, these are guys that could easily take a step this year and become not just all SEC performers, but potential All-American contenders as well. Schedule's tricky. At Tennessee is an early game this year. That's in September, so that's a little unique. So to have Tennessee on the road and Alabama at home in September is a little different for the Georgia Bulldogs. They also have to go to Auburn there in mid-October before they welcome Ole Miss and Texas to their place down the stretch. And they, of course, have that neutral site game against Florida, what should be an improved Florida team, on November 1st. Looking at their playoff prospects and the forecast for the Dogs, I think it's highly likely they're back in the 12-team playoff this year.